So my name is Sinéad Brearty and I'm the Chief Executive of Education Support. We are the charity for everybody working in education. We're here to promote and support mental health and well-being because we believe that better health, better well-being leads to better education outcomes for children and young people, but also for professionals. We think everybody is better off. It seems like a bit of a truism, doesn't it? Today, we're talking about the emotional impact of the work that we do in schools and strategies for holding that, recognizing that we can't control everything, recognizing that much of what comes at us isn't in our own gift to affect or change, but trying to think about what are the strategies and techniques that we can use practically. How can we do the best to keep ourselves well in however difficult a context we might be working? That's really what today is about. So let me introduce this fantastic panel to you. I'm delighted to welcome Sheridan Pengelly, who is a therapist. She retrained and now works in local counselling service and in private practice. But she has spent 13 years in a classroom, 10 of those as a teacher. So she's steeped in all of the issues that we'll be talking about today. Welcome, Sheridan. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
I'm also delighted to welcome Penny Whelan. And Penny is an assistant head and a SENCO. She's also an SLE and a coach, and in fact, the list of things she does is very, very long indeed. But let me tell you, she's a senior mental health lead, also in primary setting, so is bringing some very relevant experience there too. So welcome to you, Penny, as well. And finally, in South Wales, we have Lloyd Stone. And Lloyd is a health and well-being advisor. He has been a teacher as well. He's been a senior leader. He's governor. He's got school experience from across the piece, but he's now a mental health advocate and working on these issues of mental health in the school system and what we can do to make improvement. So welcome, Lloyd. Let me also introduce Teresa, for any of you who can see her. She is our sign language interpreter today. Very pleased to have her here with us. And for anyone who wants to access signing, you probably will be familiar, but just make sure you pin Teresa's video to keep her in your screen as we go through. Right, so the emotional impact of working in education. Where to begin? We have an education support just this week, just yesterday, in fact, it's been a long week, published a report, The New Reality, looking at the experience of educators and wanting to put a line in the sand, really, to say, there's been a lot of movement over the last decade in terms of what is expected from our education professionals. But we feel that what we've heard in the focus groups that we've done over the last year, what we've seen in the data that we've collected, is that there's a line has been kind of crossed at this point where all of that excess pressure that's sitting in schools has tipped the balance away from allowing people to focus on what's brought them into the profession and away from teaching. And so we're flagging this to policymakers, making specific recommendations for improvement, wanting to put that out there to really try and focus this conversation and get people on the same page around what needs to happen to sustain, improve and support our education workforce. So we come to this conversation with that research background and the Teacher Wellbeing Index and all of the other things that we produce. But we also know that talking to people working in the field is really, really important. So the panel here today, both Penny working in school right now, colleagues who've been working, Lloyd and Sheridan who've worked in the past, but are actively engaged in supporting the mental health of people working in schools. Let's have this conversation about specifically what are the things that we can do. And I think I'm going to start, Penny, I'm probably going to start by coming to you, but then I will come to colleagues as well. But I want to start with this conversation around boundaries, because it feels so significant to anything that we can begin to think about around managing and mitigating the impact of the emotional impact of working in schools. For many people, they will have a picture of what we mean by boundaries. But actually, if we come right back to it, when I say to you, thinking about boundaries in a work setting, what does that mean for you?
I mean, a variety of things, I think, to be honest. And I think it's different to every individual person. And it probably depends on what you're doing that week and what's happening in your personal life at that point in time. But I think it's deciding what works for you and what is going to maintain your good mental health and what you're going to be able to leave behind, so that you're not, we all take work home and we all think about work outside of work. As you can tell, I'm still in work. So, it's always on our mind. But for me, I think having boundaries is very much thinking about prioritizing what I need to do right now and making sure that I'm not taking home things that aren't necessary at the time. Making sure that actually I'm doing what I need to be doing right now, and some things can wait. We don't like doing that, particularly as teachers. Most of us are perfectionists, and we want to do things well, and we're thinking about the children all the time, so we want to do the best for them. But there are some things that can wait a little bit more, or you plan out your lessons and you do them fantastically well, but actually making just that extra little bit of card and laminating it, is that really going to have an impact to the learning? Is it something you really need to do, before you leave school or at home? How much can you prioritize and make the use of your day when you're in school, so that you don't have to take lots of work home? And I think, we're all guilty of it. And I certainly don't always practice what I preach, but it's always in my mind, is this necessary right now? Can I come back to it tomorrow? Can I prioritize and make a list and work out what I need to do right now and leave some things behind? And that's hard, very hard to do.
It's really interesting hearing you talking there and thinking a lot about, you're talking about being in this moment and what the now and what matters in this moment, as opposed to maybe letting some future stuff impact a little bit there. So really interesting to hear that come out and what you're saying. Lloyd, what does it mean to you to be thinking about boundaries in relation to working in a school?
Funnily enough, boundaries is something I really did struggle with during my time as a teacher. And it's only since leaving teaching I've become more aware of what boundaries are and how much they impact you. I think as teachers and in education in general, we do take too much on, and we do overwork ourselves, and it's almost to sound like a badge of honor, working these long hours and doing this above and beyond. It is in our nature. It is something kind of ingrained in the culture of teaching, to the point where, to a certain extent, the word no is a bit taboo. How can you say no to a senior leader when they're asking you to do something? How can you explain that your workload is too much? How is that going to come across? And no one wants to look as though they are not coping with the workload of what they're doing, and there's still that element to it. But it's only since leaving teaching really that I've got a much clearer idea of what boundaries are, the work-life balance aspect, and just being able to say no when you've got a lot going on, prioritizing that kind of family time and ring fencing it. That's incredibly important, and not being contactable for every minute of the day. Just having that time where you can completely switch off from work is really important.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Sheridan, how do you think about boundaries?
Often when we talk about boundaries, we think about time boundaries. How much time am I going to give to the work that I do? And as Lloyd said, as Penny has said, as teachers, there's a sense of vocation. Many people feel a sense of calling to the profession. And when you have that sense, that's when boundaries can slip. That's when we say it's okay to work until 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock every evening. So there's something around physical boundaries, time being one example, but also something that there were two little phrases that Penny used there. She said, the children are always on our mind. We think about the children all the time. So I'm interested in as well in the kind of internal boundaries, if you like, our thoughts, our emotions. And I know it was my experience that we use the phrase, don't we? I couldn't switch off. I couldn't switch off when I was teaching, and that's not healthy. So that's a boundary that I'm really interested in exploring with teachers, about how we can set a boundary in our internal space, as well as what we're doing practically.
I think this is such an important thread of the conversation, and I'm going to come back to you just around. I'm going to come back to all of you about how do we switch off, and if we can give the people who are in this webinar some ideas of the kinds of things we do. I imagine if all of us share some of the things we do, they'll be quite different. So let's come back to that. But I think picking up on another bit there that you just talked about, Sheridan, boundaries, it seems to me, are often quite straightforward to manage when everything's grand, when I'm at my best, when I'm operating on full tilt and, things are going the way I would want them to go. When they become really difficult is when I'm exhausted, when I'm tired, when I've had a really bad week, when something's happened in my personal life that's really put pressure on my work life, or vice versa. That's when I really struggle with boundaries. And one of the things that I've learned is to have for myself some rules. And I'm not a big rule person, actually. I'm much more a person of principle than rule. But I do have rules about boundaries that I have set out on a good day. On a good day, I've sat down and thought about where are my red lines and what are the things that I need to do to look after myself. And I'm going to write those down somewhere. I'm going to tell my partner, because my partner will hold me to account. And when I say I can't because, I'll be reminded, but actually you said that you weren't going to work on the weekend. And so I'm going to help you hold to that. And I think there is something for all of us to think about, setting and agreeing those red lines with ourselves, but to do it when we're well, because I think trying to pick that up when it's all slipped away a bit is just very difficult. And it's a little bit unrealistic to imagine that stressed out version of self can make a good fist of it. So I think that's something I'd say to everybody at the beginning of a term is a great time to think about what are your boundaries, because you haven't got into the swing of it yet and you're still fairly energetic. But coming back to your point, Sheridan, around switching off. So Lloyd, let's start with you. When you are, and you can think about this in your career now or from when you were in schools, what do you do to switch off? What is it that works for you?
I find it a lot easier now, I'll be honest with you, than when I was teaching, and linking to the boundaries with respect to working in the evenings and things like that. For me, I put a lot of kind of routines in place, and switching off comes naturally from those. So for example, we all have routines in the morning, setting ourselves up to go to work. It's a natural routine. We get ready, we get dressed, we walk or drive to work. Not many of us have routines for the opposite, in switching off from work into our kind of home life. So I made a real conscious effort to do that. And it starts with the journey home. It might be listening to music, a podcast, something like that. But the real routine then is when I get home and what I do. It's making sure that I completely switch off. The work stuff is away in a separate room. I might make myself a cuppa, see the family, sit down and make sure I do all the things that are non-work related, and just have, however long it is, maybe it might be 10-15 minutes of just nothing and just chatting and seeing. So that's a big one for me, because that really does allow me to immediately switch off from work, and then I am into my kind of home life and the home me, and that continues on throughout the evening.
Lovely. And Penny, for you, how do you think about switching off? How do you hold that for yourself, and what kinds of things do you do?
I think it's really hard, and I think it probably changes for me daily or even week to week. And I think a big part of it for me is I work 3 days a week. So when I had my little boy, I dropped down to 3 days and stayed that way, and he's now 4.5. So I could be back at work full time, but actually I'm in a privileged position where I'm able to work part time. But also, you know, I spend the time I can take my little one to school and I can pick him up, and I spend time with my mum, you know, who's older, and I, on those days, I don't do a lot of work for school. There are occasions where there are meetings and things and I come in. I have got my emails on my phone, so I am one of those people that, you know, does have that and does have access to them, but it's very much my choice whether I want to access those or not. I don't have to have them on my phone. I think for some people it's good practice not to, but for me it helps me keep my head above water a little bit, and I can choose whether I'm going to reply or not to those emails. So I think for me it's very much about making time for myself and my family, time where I'm not in work and I'm not taking work home with me, and I'm doing things just for me, you know, and I'm booking little trips away, or I'm seeing, you know, family and friends, and I have those things planned in, because if I don't, I know that I won't be able to relax. If I'm just at home, it's so tempting to get the laptop out and to, you know, I'll just do this little bit, I'll just answer this email, and I think we all probably fall into that trap. But if you've got things that are booked in, then that's really helpful. But sometimes I probably go too far the opposite way. I have too many things booked in, and I have too many people that I try and keep up with, and too many things, so that life can just generally be a bit of a workload in itself, you know, and so many things to remember. You know, I have lists of things to do at school, and then I have a list to do on the way home from school, and then I have a list to do when I get home. So I have to very consciously plan in opportunities where I'm not doing those things, otherwise I'll lapse back into it. So for me, it's a real conscious decision, definitely.
I love the intentionality that you're talking about there. And I wonder, Sheridan, if that speaks a bit to what you were talking about in terms of internal boundary and internal structure. I don't know, would you say any more about that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. One thing that helps with switching off mentally is that we have to change our thought patterns, and we have to do that by doing something different. So an intentional activity that is completely absorbing for you, whatever that may be, it might be a 10-minute activity doing a crossword. It might be watching a TV program. It might be something that you do once a week, learning a new skill, joining a choir, something like that. And finding an activity that completely absorbs you and you can only focus on that one activity is so helpful in terms of breaking that cycle of constantly thinking about what have I done, what haven't I done, which children am I concerned about, when is my next observed lesson. You know, it's about breaking that cycle and breaking that pattern. So if you can find mini activities, but also perhaps find something that you commit to once a week that really, I've just joined a musical theatre company, and I know that I cannot think about anything else when I am trying to learn my lines for that. So something like that really takes your whole focus into that activity is really helpful.
There's so much in what you say there. I'm scribbling notes so I don't forget what I was going to say. The point about being absorbed, of course, is so important, because that just allows our systems to come down a bit. And also something in the absorption in other stuff helps us regain a bit of perspective and hold everything a little bit less tightly. So I love that. I love flagging that. Allowing ourselves to be absorbed is so important. And I think there's almost a step before it as well, which is accepting that this is a right and good and proper thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think one of the things I speak to teachers and school leaders about a lot is something I've come to learn. I started my career in the city, and I didn't have any boundaries, and I was a workaholic, and I had the life that went with it. I think nobody ever is going to fix that for you. Nobody's ever going to re-establish your relationship to work. And somewhere actually inside ourselves, we need to accept that it is the act of professionalism actually to build these moments and activities into our lives, because I think it's very easy for us to feel guilty in taking that time. And, I could be marking, but I'm going to go to do some singing or whatever it is. But I think if we can reframe that and recognize that it's not taking anything away from the kids, it's actually enabling us to go back to work in much better shape. And as well as giving us the space to be a better professional, it's helping us to be a better person, a better parent, a better partner, a better friend, a better daughter, son, whatever it might be. So I think that bit seems to me to be really key. And Penny, you talked about phones. I know certainly I'm somebody who should never have my work email on my phone. And I had to put it on a separate device actually to stop me carrying it around, because I can't help myself. And the moment I open an email at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, that's it. My head is gone. So it has to be physically kept away from me, or I would go back to my bad old habits of just plowing on through. So I think you make the point that for you, it helps you stay well and actually feel on top of stuff. And for me, it has the opposite. And I guess I flag that because for everybody who's listening, that's a really good indication that there's no right or wrong here. Actually, we are all different and we have to find our own way. But both Penny and I have found ways of dealing with that work for us. They're diametrically opposed and both are right in the different circumstances. And I think don't feel like there is a way to do this and there is a way to be well. It's very much something that we negotiate for ourselves. Thank you for that. I'm also going to remind participants that we are here for you. So if you're sitting there with a burning question or you're clicking your fingers on the desk thinking, but when are they going to talk about if that's something that you want, please drop us a question, put a comment in the chat, and we will be delighted to pick up the themes and address them that you want to hear us discuss. But in the meantime, I want to ask colleagues about culture in a school. So if I'm working in a school, it's very easy for me to feel like a very small cog in a system and to not feel like I can do a whole heap to make that a better place, even if I wanted to. And yet we know there's a correlation between people feeling like they work in a school that's got a culture that they like, that supports them, and them feeling well and actually wanting to stay in the profession and feeling well supported. So how can are we just a cog? Are we just at the mercy of everybody else at school, or are there things that we can do? And I'm not saying that it's for us to fix, but as long as we're there, are there things that we can do with colleagues to build out those collegiate relationships to create the kind of culture we want to work in? And I'm curious whether any of you have experiences you'd want to share around
that. Yeah, I will. So my school, I love my school. I've been here about 15 years. And it was actually where I trained, but I have worked in different schools in between and supported in different schools. But I love it, and it's by no means perfect, and things, go wrong, and gosh, we all have a moan about each other sometimes, and all sorts of things happen. But generally, it's the most supportive place. I always get, not on Sunday night because I don't work till a Wednesday, but on a Tuesday night, I'm always like, oh, I've got work tomorrow. But I never dread coming to work. I don't ever have that fear. I don't worry about it. After the summer holidays, I'm looking forward to going back and seeing my colleagues. And by the end of term, we probably all had enough of each other. But at the beginning of the term, it's different because you're all looking forward to that. It's such a supportive place to be, and that's not something that has just happened quickly. That's grown over a long period of time. We don't have a huge high turnover of staff. And everyone, I like to feel that everyone is valued, and I think everyone does feel that way. But like I said, we'd all have our moments, and we all have the teacher guilt, don't we? When we're off sick, very much when anyone's poorly here, it's never, we're not ringing them saying when you back, but we all feel like we should be in school even when we're poorly. And that's something that you have to make peace with yourself. You have to appreciate you've got to listen to your own body, and listen to your colleagues. Your colleagues will be saying to you, don't come back, you're not well enough. It's not, you don't need to come back yet. But I think I would say to people that it's very much about finding the school that's right for you and the place that's right for you, because ultimately we are all small cogs. No one is irreplaceable, and I think that's quite hard for any of us to understand, that if we weren't here or we did go somewhere else, everything would still carry on, but you need to be in a place where you feel valued and you feel heard, and you know, you look forward to going into. Because if you're in a school where you don't feel that, it doesn't mean the school is bad, it doesn't mean there's anything necessarily wrong with the school, it just means that perhaps it's not the right fit for you and your own you know, work ethic and your own ethos as well. So definitely find the place that's right for you.
Great wisdom in that. Lloyd, I'm curious if when you're talking, you know, to schools and to educators, if you have clearly, you know, Penny's advice, find the right fit for you, and it doesn't make it necessarily a good or a bad school, but it's a good fit for you. But if you have somebody who's in a place that it's not a great fit for them, and for whatever reason they don't feel they can move just now, what can they do to try and improve that situation, to try and build a bit of collegiality, to try and make some connection? What kinds of things would you be talking to people about trying to do there?
I think there's so many different factors that contribute to developing that kind of culture in school, but I think communication is so important. Having those good lines of communication, but communicating clearly your needs, because there's so much that can kind of be misconstrued or lost in translation if you're not communicating your needs. And that's when I think there is that confusion. I'm sure we've all experienced situations where communication has been less than good, should we say, and the impact that has had. But opening up those lines of communication, whether that be purely work related, it could be that you've had a bit of a wretched day and just venting, but having those lines of communication and developing a culture where communication is vital and valued goes a long way, I think, to developing that culture, because without that talking and that openness, I don't think you can develop the culture you want. But I think also is having those value and empathy, and not judging people if they are having those bad days, and if they are struggling, if they are coming out asking for advice and support. Because to nurture that positive culture, you need to understand where they are coming from, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with you and your ability to do the work. And you're not sympathizing, you're empathizing. Is a big difference between the two, isn't it? So yeah, I think I'd most certainly look at that aspect and growing the culture that way. But I think if you do want to develop that positive culture, as what Penny was saying, it has to be a whole school approach. It has to be the school as a community. It can't be necessarily a top-down model. You're all responsible for it, and you can all be responsible for that change. So you can be the nucleus for that. And I suppose it's that butterfly effect then, isn't it? And that ripple effect.
I think there's a lovely, I think sometimes when we're in difficult situations, our own power seeps away out of us, and to be reminded that we are a community, and actually as a community, my voice matters as much as anybody else's, is really, really powerful. And sometimes actually frightening, I think. But you make a lovely point about standing in the shoes of other people, and trying to hold that, and maybe not get entrenched in a position of judging other people, which again, I think is something most of us can manage quite well on a good day. We might struggle more on a bad day, but being reminded of it is a really helpful piece. Sheridan, is there anything you'd add to that around connection and collegiality and the culture in a school?
Yes. The last school that I taught in had a very competitive culture amongst teachers, which was really unhelpful. And I wish I'd known then what I know now, because if I had done, I would have challenged some of those behaviours that were going on. And I would have challenged it, because if I was feeling overwhelmed by it, then I'm absolutely certain there was somebody else on the staff in that school who was feeling the same way. And so when we express what our needs are, as Lloyd said, when we kind of put the boundary up and say, you know, I can do this, but I can't, when we say no to things, we're actually giving other people permission to do the same thing. We're giving them encouragement to be able to say the same thing and to be able to use their own voice. As you say, that happens on a good day, but hopefully in a school where that is being built up, not everyone's having a bad day on the same day. And you can, you know, you become the voice for one another. So yes, definitely finding a way of expressing what your needs are, as Lloyd said, is really important. Perhaps in the first instance to a colleague that you feel safe with, and just explaining to them, you know, what your difficulties are. But certainly if you are feeling that way, someone else will be feeling that way too.
There's a lovely democratization of the experience in what you described there, Sheridan. And I think oftentimes I feel this particular, you know, I'm an old bird at this point, and I've been through enough rounds of stuff, but I feel particularly for younger colleagues who might feel like it's just them, or there's something wrong with them, or they're on their own. And you know, one of the advantages of getting older is recognizing exactly what you say, that if I'm feeling it, I'm probably not the only one. And then being a little bit less afraid sometimes to put your head above the parapet if that's the case. There's a couple of questions that have come in that I think touch on this a little bit. One coming from a colleague in Scotland who's talking about a shift in the system there to trauma-informed practice and relational practice, but highlighting that in doing that, educators are not really being supported or trained to hold the amount of emotional content that is coming up in that mode and in that way of being. And so the question she asks is, staff are burning out, they can't hold what's they're being asked to do without a significant personal cost. What can we do for ourselves and each other in a system that won't resource us? Which I think is quite a profound question. And I'm going to throw in my thoughts, and then Sheridan and Lloyd, if you have things you'd add, please do, and Penny as well. But I mean, my initial thoughts are there's a couple of levels to this. One is, I think within the school that you're in, you need to raise it as an issue. You need to raise it with the leadership team and ask them to do a risk assessment actually around the sort of psychological safety of the work environment that you're in. I think we have some tools on our website that might support around that. I think you could ask for an expert point of view. I know certainly if you want to follow this conversation up after this event, I'd be very happy to just try and see if there's some way that education support could offer a point of view that's helpful at this point in time into that system. I think your union might be able to help, particularly when it comes to health and safety and risk assessment and psychological safety. And again, might be that we could do something together around that. But in the moment where you feel like you're holding a lot, I have kind of two immediate practical suggestions. One is we have a tool on our website. We have a little video e-learning module. I know the last thing anyone wants when they're hassled is e-learning, but bear with me. We designed this and wrote it specifically for educators who are carrying a lot, but are not resourced. And the whole point of it is to enable colleagues to pair up and provide peer support in pairs. And there's a whole framework. It takes you through how to set that up, how to contract with each other, how to avoid colluding, how to listen well, and some question starters. And so there's a whole structure there that you can use. The e-learning itself, I can't remember, but it doesn't take much more than an hour, I think, to do. And that just might be a framework that you could take in practice while you wait for some other things to change. It might give you an immediate modality to work through some of this stuff. And the last thing I would say is that for you or anyone else who's feeling really very burdened, we have a helpline, the 08000 number, education supports number, which colleagues will put in the chat, 08000 562 561. And that helpline is free and confidential. It's staffed by trained counsellors. They know how to have conversations, and you can phone it up and say, listen, I'm left sitting with this thing and I can't switch off and I can't get rid of it and I'm feeling really quite overwhelmed. And you can talk to them, and they know how to have that conversation sensitively and well, and to help you make progress through that, which is a little bit, I know, of dealing with the fallout, but there are times I think when that's really important. Colleagues, I don't know if you have other things that you would add there around what somebody might be able to do if they're in that situation with specific burden, really.
I just want to thank that person for raising the issue. The whole school system is experiencing trauma at the moment. And, you know, one of your statistics was that 71% of staff are emotionally exhausted. You know, that's very, very serious. And there is a sense post-pandemic that, you know, there is a collective sense of trauma. So the first thing that I want to say to that person is thank you for recognising that. I'm sorry that you're experiencing it. We've run through a few things that are on the website, but the crucial thing for you is to speak to someone and find a way of sharing the load that you're carrying, because if you try to carry it on your own, that will lead to greater problems for you further down the path, perhaps. So I would really encourage you to speak to someone, speak to a professional, speak to the helpline, but really unburden yourself from what you're carrying.
I think, Sheridan, just something I would add in there for anyone who hasn't had a conversation with a counsellor before and is kind of a bit fearful of it. Something I found very helpful is recognising that we don't go and talk to a counsellor because they have an answer for us. That's not actually what we're doing in that process. And oftentimes we are, through the fact of talking, through the fact of putting words on our experience, that's helping us to move through it and to get to the other side of the particular thing that's there in the moment. Mm-hmm. And so I think if you can hold it as a route to letting go, then and see talking as a vehicle for that, I think it has a huge amount of value. I mean, I can say that for my own self as someone who's had therapy on and off for years. There's a lot of value in being able to talk and put words on stuff, particularly when it comes to avoiding burnout. Because I think, as Sheridan said, you know, being able to say something before it becomes too much is really what you want to try and do. So just to amplify that point. Penny and Lloyd, unless you particularly wanted to jump in, I'm going to go to another question that's come in there, and again encourage participants to keep coming at us with the questions. One question that's come through here is, have we seen examples where supervision is used well with teachers, and recognizing that other professions use this? And what about in the education profession? I've got loads to say about this, but I'm going to zip it because I've spoken too much. So colleagues, where have you seen supervision in practice in education, and what do you think, and how does it work?
There's not enough of it, I'd say. And I suppose it's not something I was very familiar with until fairly recently. And it's something that we've got set up for particular members of staff at the moment, but something that we want to roll out to more staff, I'd say. So our designated safeguarding lead has supervision, and our family workers who deal with the safeguarding issues as well. Supervision was very much needed for them, and that's been happening. I'm lucky because I've recently done an ELSA course, so emotional literacy, and I've had supervision through that. And just the opportunity to be able to offload and to talk. Some schools might have coaching sessions instead, or might have other things in place, but I think supervision, if you can have it, if you can organise it to be in your school, or if you have it in your school and you can access it, it's so beneficial. I think it's something that's needed more and more at the moment, and something we could definitely all do with. But I know sometimes it's costly and it can't always happen, but definitely needs more of it.
Yeah. Lloyd, have you seen any of that?
I'm seeing more and more in schools now setting up kind of in-house wellbeing teams and groups. So they're not accessing necessarily outside provision, but again, coming back to the culture aspect and changing the culture of the school, is setting up wellbeing groups where they are supporting each other within the school, which seems to be working well. But again, as well as that comes down to staffing, training, making sure that the right people are providing those kind of support sessions and things, but also then it's allowing those in the wellbeing teams to access the right support for them as well. So it does kind of have a knock-on effect there, and you know, like a lot at the moment, comes down to the funding and things. But I am seeing more and more schools kind of trying to provide that service for their staff by having that kind of peer support group in place.
We have at Education Support made quite a big investment of time and effort into proving the case for supervision in education. We've been running we've run a series of projects over the last, I think it's 2.5 years now, in this space, and we are developing quite a strong evidence base that supervision is really valuable in education. There's a lot of work to be done before it is regularly available and routinely available, and unfortunately the work that we were funded to do is fully subscribed, so I can't offer that out to colleagues on this call unless you're in Wales. And for school leaders in Wales, I think we do have some supervision available, so if that's of interest, please take a look and sign up, because I think we can offer it there. But otherwise we will continue to lobby for investment in this area, because the research, the impact assessment of the work that we've done has been so powerful. And Elaine, if you have any opportunities to follow that up, and there are things in place where you're working, by all means do. I really recommend it. I was shocked at just how powerful it was. It really surprised me, and I was an advocate for it. So I highly recommend it if there's an opportunity to do that. I want to just come to a really interesting question that's come up in the chat there around the approachability of leadership, and how can we make sure that SLT is approachable and that staff are being listened to. And what I love about that question, it's not that staff feel listened to, but they are being listened to. And I think that's a really important choice of verb. Colleagues, what do you think about this? How can we make sure? What can SLTs do? What support do they need? What can they do? How can they be thinking about this to improve their approachability and to be listening to staff?
It needs to be high priority for SLT, and I think if you are SLT, so I'm one of the assistant heads, I'm the senior mental health lead, and that's recently been handed over to me from another member of SLT. So it's high on our priority list, and we're the ones that attend training and then cascade that training. But I think if you're in school and you're perhaps the mental health lead, or you're feeling like you need support and you're not SLT, that can be quite hard, because how do you get them to see it as a priority? And that's really tricky. But I would say, if there's quite a few of you, feeling the same way, then you need to bite the bullet, and you need to approach them and talk to them about it. You need to maybe try and encourage them to go on some training, or come on some training with you, or arrange for some training to happen in school if you're the lead but you're not SLT, so that everyone buys into it. Because once they do, and they go on the training and they'll see the impact, and I can guarantee they feel the same way, carrying the same burdens, or different burdens in some cases, but SLT will 100% be feeling the same, and perhaps just aren't aware because they haven't had the training and they haven't had the same opportunities. So give them the chance to make it high priority, let them see how valuable it is and how important it is, organize some training and talk to them. They're just normal people. I like to think normal people. I know it can be scary, but if there's lots of you saying the same thing, then don't be on your own when you do it. Have a frank discussion, because it needs to happen.
Spoken by a normal person right there. Thank you, Penny. And any other additions, Lloyd or Sheridan, that you want to make? I'm going to rattle through another couple of questions here, but anything you wanted to add to that?
I just think it's important that if you are trying to implement something such as that, you do need a senior leader to be fully involved in it as well, to have that advocate from that senior leadership team, because the best will in the world, I think that's where the gravitas is. And you do need those senior leaders to be on board with it. So I do think to grow something like that within the school and to have those changes, you do need that one senior leader to be on that journey with you.
Yeah, lovely. Sheridan, did you want to add something there?
I was just looking at the question and what they were saying about feeling valued and respected. And, you know, in schools, we've spent so much time thinking about the ethos of the school for the children, but really all of that needs to cascade out to all of the staff members in school. And it's a pretty basic ask, really, isn't it, to feel valued and respected. So I would just endorse what everyone else has said, but consider it as, you know, the ethos of the school needs to run not just through the children, but also the staff as well.
I'm going to come back and ask you if any of you wants to talk about sleep and disrupted sleep when you can't switch off. So I'm going to land that. I'm also wanting to come back to Lloyd and just ask the question of around men's mental health, and is there anything additional that hasn't been said that we should be adding there? But in response to that question around the SLT, I think if you are a member of SLT and you're trying to engage with this and you're looking at how do I do it, you know, I have a lot of compassion for that. I think it's very hard sometimes to be in a leadership role because there's the role and there's your humanity, and those two things don't always align perfectly well because the requirements of the role sometimes are really difficult and challenging. But I think some of the things that I've learned through the years, I'd say trying to be honest and straightforward with information when you can. And it takes a long time for people to trust you. And it takes a long time to build that kind of culture in any environment. So you have to also have patience and know that it's a bit thankless for the first 2 or 3 years. You know, it takes some time to get that going. I think when you ask questions of staff, when you create the opportunity for people to share, ask questions in areas where you can do something with the answers. Don't ask open questions. Don't open cans of worms that you can't address, because you'll only end up with people feeling upset and thinking it was a cynical activity. So you've got to focus and facilitate the questions so that they are meaningful and realistically grounded in the context you're working in. Somebody said in the chat, you said we did. I think that's brilliant. Playing back to people how you've listened, what you've heard, because sometimes there's a message, we think we've heard it, but when we play back what we've heard, it's not exactly what they meant. So that reflecting back and checking is also really important. And I think the other thing is when you create spaces for staff to talk, they need to be safe spaces. Nobody wants to fill in a survey if they think their line manager is going to read it. They're not going to fill it in honestly. So it needs to be really clearly signposted that it is safe to answer and there is some independence in the listening that's not going to come back and create a problem for someone if they're honest. So I think that's just some of the stuff I'd throw into the mix. And then sleep. Who wants to talk about switching off, it infecting your sleep, and what can you do if that's the situation you're in?
I'm by no means an expert, but meditating works really well for me, I'll be honest, and just having that guided meditation for sleep. So you get the apps, there's a few things on Spotify, and you just earphones in, and it works an absolute dream for me, I'll be totally honest with you. And it sounds really basic, but when you find something that works for you, don't tend to look much further, do you? So yeah, that's mine anyway.
Sheridan, I'm wondering if you have some thoughts before I dive in with some around if sleep is disrupted because somebody's struggling to switch off. My thinking is that there's a bit of processing that needs to be done there, but you're going to be more of an expert on this than me.
Sure, absolutely. And the problem with it is that it's a vicious cycle. So lack of sleep then impacts your mental health further. So one thing that is helpful is, again, to kind of empty your mind in some way of all of the things that you are carrying. When I was teaching, I was constantly, I was going to sleep thinking about the lesson plans for the next day, the planning that I had to do, and so on and so on. What did I need to remember? Having a notebook of some kind beside, even beside your bed, so that you can just write those things down before you go to sleep. And also having a good routine for, approaching sleep as well. So it isn't just about when we lie down, close our eyes and hope to go to sleep, but it's about, the previous half an hour, like Lloyd said, about having a guided meditation, just being really intentional and conscious of letting go of what's happened during the day, and feeling relaxed and then able to go to sleep. But yes, if you can't sleep, then that's a sign that there is something that you need to process in other ways.
And talking might be one of the vehicles for that. But the other thing that I increasingly understand is important, the more I read, is a physical outlet. Our bodies are not a brain. We're not a brain on a stick. Our bodies fully are alive with all of the experiences that we're having down to our fingertips. And actually, one of the most powerful things that we can do to regulate our systems is to move. You might not want to, you don't have to go to the gym. I'm not saying you have to take up some brand new sport, but just a brisk walk, anything. But dance, a Friday night disco in the kitchen is a great thing. And I promise you, if you have a proper Friday night disco in the kitchen, you will sleep better as a result, because your body is able to let go of some of that stress that's embodied. And that's part of what's waking you up at night. So I send you my best and hope that some of that will land. Lloyd, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to tell us why something about men's health that we haven't said so far. And then Penny, I'm going to come to you for the last word around this final question. And how do we pursue excellence in what we do in schools with sustainability for the workforce, for the community? So I'm going to come back to you on that at the end. But Lloyd, hit me with men's mental health. What have we not said that matters here?
Model good communication in school. And what I mean by that is walk the walk. If you are a female or non-male within the school and you want to promote that talking around mental health and bringing the men with you, just model it. Be there to allow the men to talk. Because there's still a heck of a lot of stigma around mental health in general, but especially around men and those values of masculinity which are beyond archaic, which really do need to be redefined. But because of that, men are reluctant to open up. But I think, again, culture and that positive ethos around that individual promoting talk will have a really big impact on that person.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lloyd. Penny, I'm going to come to you on this question, and then I'm going to ask everybody for just the one thing you'd want people who are listening to this to take away. Penny, how do you reconcile the pursuit of excellent provision with a sustainable school community?
I mean, you're finishing with the toughest question out of all of it, really, aren't you? But I think there's lots of different ways you can do that, and it's definitely doable, but it has to be down to, I think, the ethos and culture of the school. It's got to be a journey for the school together, and you can do an excellent job with the children, you can make excellent progress with them, you can develop excellent citizens who are really emotionally aware, but also you've got to make sure that the staff are feeling valued and heard and listened to, and are not carrying too much of that workload. And it's a really fine balance, but it has to be a whole school approach. And it's things like including staff, when you're looking at different policies, looking at the marking policy together, making sure it's reflective of what the staff do, rather than being prescriptive with things, making sure that you take on board things that are necessary and new initiatives and things that will work for you, but not just taking on board everything because it sounds like a good idea. So I think it's being very selective about what you do in your school and what works for your school, your children and your staff. And it's tricky, but it's definitely doable.
I love that. Being selective, specific to your context, being selective, prioritizing and deprioritizing. We always forget to deprioritize. And there's something also about the human scale of that. And I think excellence doesn't have to be excellent. You don't have to be excellent in how you order toilet paper. You know, there are things that you need to be excellent at, and you need to determine what it is that really matters, as Penny says, in your context, and then let the other stuff go. But with good staff, happy staff, you have a far better chance of having excellence with happy, well-rested, engaged staff than otherwise. But I would say that, wouldn't I? Right, colleagues, what do you want to? I'm going to come to you first, Sheridan. What's the one thing you want people to take away from this webinar?
I've never met a teacher who isn't doing their best, but part of doing your best is doing the best for yourself as well. So part of being that excellent teacher that you want to be is about taking care of you, because that benefits the children in your care. So make it a priority for yourself. Don't feel guilty about it or selfish about it, because it's actually part of what you're doing for the children. So in all the ways that we've talked about, whether you pick up on the meditation from Lloyd or from Penny and about how to answer emails or not answer emails, be the best teacher that you can be by taking care of yourself as well.
Lovely, thank you. Lloyd, what's your lasting note here?
Sheridan to mine. I'm going to communicate your needs, open lines of communication, and very, very important in terms of looking after yourself as well. So communication is key.
Having the confidence to communicate your own needs rather than just receiving is a really important one. Love it. Love both of those. And Penny.
You've taken all the best ones now, the other two. I'd say you can't pour from an empty cup. So definitely look after your own well-being. And also on the days when you feel like you've just had enough and it's all gone horribly wrong and you can't remember why you even do it, there's a poem that's on my wall and I won't tell you it, but look it up. It's called the Starfish Poem. I'm sure most of you have read it before, but it's all about why we do what we do and how you can make a difference sort of every day. So yeah, look after yourself and look up the Starfish Poem.
Fantastic. And I'll say for my part, talk, laugh and move. And if you can do those three things, you'll be keeping yourself, you know, to a large extent in reasonable nick. What you do matters so much. It matters now more than ever before. And you matter as the people who are out there in our classrooms working with our kids and our young people at just this point in history. So thank you for everything that you do. Please attend to yourself. It's the hallmark of good professionalism. And we hope to see you again at one of these webinars. My thanks to our fantastic panelists. Thanks so much for giving up your time and coming to share your expertise and wisdom. And to colleagues who've been part of the call, if there's other topics you think we should be running webinars on, if there's support you think we should be developing, please keep talking to us. We are here to serve you and we'll do whatever we can. Take care, look after yourselves, and go and have some time off at some point this evening. Cheerio.